So, everybody, we are making our way through the 11 chapters of Richard Rohr's book, The Wisdom Pattern, which is his latest book. And what he and his staff did was take some very important cassette presentations and rework them into a book, having the coronavirus and its attendant crises as the lenses through which we're looking at it. So next slide, that's what we're doing. We're on chapter 2 today. I've lived a lot with this slide from it was the last slide from last week. And it's really been interesting to see what different thinkers are using as metaphors to interpret the pandemic. And one person had told me that he was seeing this as a timeout time for us to contemplate what's going on. And I have really found that to be a positive thing. I find timeout times to be very positive, not punitive. Somebody else talked about a forced retreat, not a retreat in terms of turning around, but like a prayer retreat, to be very contemplative and ask what's going on. Oprah talks about it being an evolutionary thing. Lots of people are talking about it as being a transition to a new way of living. So I just want to invoke that now. Let's go to the next slide. So this was the crazy turn that I made today as I was developing these PowerPoint slides. I've got a bunch on my spiritual and intellectual and theological plate. And I think that's just the way I am. It's part of my neuroses. But not only am I thinking a lot about COVID and what we're learning from that, not only am I really concerned about the fires in California, and in fact, the entire West Coast, and this is a picture from a fire in California. And clearly the climate change that we're undergoing with more and more storms. Hurricane Sally came to Alabama today or last night, and never have we gotten that far in the alphabet to the S's this early in the hurricane season. And then I've finished up this amazing book by Eddie Glaude from Princeton, who's the chair of the African American Studies Department. Has written his current critique of what's going on in terms of our racial situation and issues through the lens of James Baldwin. And one of the themes there has to do with responsibility, that you can't lose your responsibility, but you sure can abdicate your responsibility, but it's always there calling on you. So if one refuses to abdicate our responsibility, then the invitation is to begin again. And that's begin again is a theme from James Baldwin. And then finally, I put here the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which now has been deemed by one New York Times critic as the most important nonfiction work to appear in the 21st century. My wife has almost finished it. I've begun it. And not only does she introduce something that is very important in terms of caste underneath all sorts of divisions, including racism, but my, is it well, absolutely beautifully written. And she saw a conversation between her and Brian Stevenson. It's worth Googling it all, because he is absolutely giddy when he's with Isabel Wilkerson. And she talks about how much she loves her metaphors, and she is really good at it. So I made this slide at the very end of the afternoon because I just wanted you to know that this is our plate that we're looking at. All of this stuff in terms of our relationship to the world and nature, our relationship to one another, what we're supposed to learn from this coronavirus. So I just wanted you to understand that that's the kind of macro context in which I'm gonna give you the rest of these slides. Okay, well, let's go to the next one. So, you know, Richard Rohr at the top left is the author we're looking at, and his book is Providing the Architecture. And then Charles Eisenstein is going to be really featured a lot tonight. And then I want you to know Diane Nash, if you don't know her already. She has a power over me because I had always heard about her, but had never kind of gone to school about her. She and John Lewis were the two kind of star students in James Lawson's class in Nashville when they were Fisk students. And they were the kids who led so much change in Nashville. And she's got quite a point of view. I quoted her in my interview of Jim Lawson for the forum, and he said, "Oh, I love that." So I just want to introduce their language right now, and we are going to go in and out of these ideas. But I think the overarching question is, what is the most life-giving story to live by that serves everyone's flourishing? Not only our flourishing, but the flourishing of every other human being, and also the flourishing of the planet. So if there's one question that is the theme of tonight, and will be one of the questions for you to think about when you're in your small groups tonight, it is, have you identified, or are you aware of the story, or are you in the process of changing the story that you live by, so that you have a story that serves you better, and not only serves you well, but serves everybody else well? So Eisenstein claims that we are between two stories: the story of separation, and it is transitioning to a story of interbeing. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. Diane Nash talks about embodying the freedom that is available to every human being as realizing your own inner power as a leader. We'll come back to her in a few minutes. And Richard Rohr talks about the end of modern civilization and its story of salvation through progress, replaced by a postmodern story and its emptiness, cynicism, and nihilism. And what he advocates is the wisdom pattern, or the cyclic or pastoral patterns of cross and resurrection. Okay, next pattern, slide. So Eisenstein finds story to be determinative of what system you and I live in and what life we live. The story creates the system, and we create the story. And every culture has a mythology or a major story, or what Toni Morrison called the master narrative, by which everybody lives. And he says that we've lived for very long with the story of separation. And that is a story that says essentially you're a separate individual among other separate individuals in this objective reality that has fundamentally nothing to do with you. It's all apart from you. And in order to be secure and in order to thrive and enjoy well-being, you have to, on the one hand, dominate or have power over all the competing other separate selves. And you have to insulate yourself from the forces of nature and become the master of nature. The old distorted notion of dominion over, which is a bad translation of the Genesis story. So, whenever you feel urging up in you, welling up in you, the will to control, the will to dominate, it's the story of separation, and it's baked into the cake. It's not because we're bad or we're dominators. It's because the story we're living in. Isabel Wilkerson talks about caste, and the caste being a how that whole caste story being a power that we swim in, that comes in we inhabit, and it kind of takes control if you don't watch yourself. So if you see the world as composed of separate, competing others, Adelaide Steele says it's an absolutely brilliant book. Thanks, Adelaide. If you see nature as this random melee of force and mass, then of course you're going to want to dominate. You're going to want to control. And there's a wall there to illustrate the separateness story. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the option is the story of interbeing. It's the new and ancient story, according to Eisenstein, of interbeing, which is a word coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, a wonderful Buddhist priest. It's a very natural term. It means more than interconnection or interdependency, which kind of suggests separate selves having relationships. But interbeing is more of an understanding that we are relationships. My very existence depends or draws from or includes your existence. So my well-being is intimately connected to your well-being, or to the well-being of the river, the ocean, the forest, people across the world, and so forth, because I'm not really separate from you. And that means that in the story of interbeing, I know that whatever I do to the world will come back to me somehow. Now, before we move on, I'm going to read, and I've turned this into a slide in the latest version of this. If you want, I can send it to you. But this is the book, Begin Again. And Eddie Glaude describes interbeing this way: to see oneself in others and to see others in yourself. And he says that one of the themes of this is the lie that white people are superior to other people. And that when you live in the lie, it actually disfigures one's soul. It means the subjugation of others. And it closes off this ability to see oneself in others and to see them in oneself. All right, so now the point of this slide is to say that this stuff has power over you. So it behooves us to ask what story we're living in. And another way to look at it is to see, I'll definitely send it to you, Lala, but what story is your life serving? And and let me just kind of go back to that that quote. He goes on to say that James understood said that we are called to understand the history of how any of us had any disfigurement to our souls. In doing so, to free ourselves and the country from the insidious hold of fall, to become a of creation, a different way of being in the world. I'll never forget Lee Sewell saying she was so damn angry about it, what she had to unlearn. So anyway, here we go. Let's go. And I'm thinking that the story could be a way of understanding the word, that we are made with God's us, and when we discover God's story in our truth, then we come alive. And that's going to be the point of some of these prayer films. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I just want to, and we won't stay on this one long, you've seen it a million times, to re-understand Oprah's call to ask what our essential and unique role is. Another way of talking about it is that, what is your essential and unique part of the story that is emerging within us? Because the story of interbeing, it has life in it, and it is emerging in us. And whenever you feel great, I think it's because that the story of interbeing is rising up inside you. Okay, go to the next slide. So we're back to, now we're at Richard Rohr. We're going to launch into the second chapter. And he's just interested in the social reconstruction that can happen when we have meaning. And when we don't have meaning, we're in crisis. And a lot of people are finding the coronavirus to be a time of crisis because we don't have a great meaning that can take us through this crisis. And Richard Rohr, spoiler alert, is saying healthy Christianity, one that talks about death and resurrection and coming again, the paschal cyclical mystery, is the way to have a story that gives you life. Next slide. So this is the last old slide, but I have lived with this whole notion. It still has life in me. His critique of the philosophy of progress, which he describes as modernism, versus the cyclical or paschal or wisdom dying and rising pattern. And he says that modernism died and postmodernism came in to take its place rather than a good old cyclical pattern of death and resurrection. And that leads to nihilism and cynicism. So we don't want modernism or postmodernism. We want life-giving. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. Not as an exclusively Christian thing. No. The Christ that he's talking about is that divinity that's in every human being and is also in rocks and leaves and lizards and those bald eagles down in Florida. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the last old slide. So I've been thinking an awful lot as I read this book of Eddie Glaude, that the death of modernism for us didn't take place until 1968 with the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy and the beginning of the Reagan era. It had hit Europe with World War II and the Holocaust. Okay, next slide. So, Rohr's components of a healthy Christianity are the components of a paschal worldview, or a wisdom worldview, or a dying and rising worldview. This is his healthy Christianity. And it is about dealing with pain and chaos. Pain that includes deep social injustice, to the pain of poverty, income inequality, income immobility, broken relationships, broken psyches. It's about the pain of depression and suicide in our lives. And it's looking at pain from the perspective of the cross and resurrection. He says another way of understanding what spirituality is about what we do with our pain. The cross and resurrection image, or the paschal story, trusts. Oh, Neil was asking, who are the prophets of modernism? Certainly they are not people close to the pain and suffering. Yeah, you're going to come to that. In case this cross and resurrection image of the paschal story trusts there is meaning whenever there's suffering. Now that doesn't mean that God causes suffering, but in my theology it means that God always enters every moment of suffering to give you and me the energy to transform it. Suffering that is not healed will transmit more suffering. Hurt people hurt people. In pain people make people in pain. Unless we transform it through this power. So there's some basics. One, that God is. There is a transcendent center in life. There is a story that is alive. God is good. That story of the transcendent center in life is good news. Now, let me pause right there. You'll see in these prayer little presentations, little prayer videos, that I believe that when you go into contemplative prayer stillness or the still point, it's not just one little prick, it's alive with power to help us live in an embodied way the life of interbeing. That I see that your life means a lot to me, and that my life means something to you. And we can entrust our life to that story. And that God is on our side. That story is on the side of every part of creation. So God is on the side of this little pine tree that's growing up after a horrible forest fire. The interbeing energy of resurrection is on the side of that pine tree. God's eye is on the sparrow, and I know God watches me. Next paragraph, next slide. So postmodern and modern stories don't know how to deal with pain. Here's a very painful forest fire. The modern civilization story dealt with pain from a machine lens. All of us are just interlocking substances, and that transforms our pain into something better. Now that story has disappeared. The postmodern story, or postmodern civilization, which has no transcendent center, there's not one to whom we can hand over the pain or expect will come into the pain and transform it. In a culture with no cross and resurrection image, there's no meaning to our suffering. Next slide. So he spends several pages talking about victimhood, and that's the name of the chapter, that we can play the victim, or we can have victimhood as our identity. And that resonates with Eisenstein's polarization trap, which is a chapter or a theme inside the separation story. Now, here's where Diane Nash really is an amazing embodiment of a leader. She later married Jim Bevel, and they had a couple of kids, and then they divorced, and she's continued her activism. And she talks about there's a source of power in each one of us that we don't realize until we take responsibility. Which brings to my mind the old rabbis who told the story about the Hebrew children who came up against the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army, Pharaoh's army, was right behind them. And Moses lifted up his arms and told the Red Sea to part. And according to some of the rabbis, the Red Sea didn't do a damn thing. It didn't move. And finally, the Hebrew children decided that they were going to take things in their own hands and assume that God was going to divide the Red Sea. And they went out there, got their clothes wet, came up to waist and deep and their chest deep. And it was not until they got up to their nostrils that God parted the Red Sea. It's that business of taking responsibility and assuming that it is gonna work. Oh, I wish I had a quote from last night that you'll hear in the forum. I don't see it. Anyway, I hope you'll listen to the forum. I can't find that quote, but it's about being people of hope. Nevertheless, In the separation story, or Rohr's playing the victim story, or being a victimhood, you get into this moral high ground without doing moral development. And it's about domination, control, and win-lose. And victimhood continues the divisiveness. So I'm more of a victim than you are, or you are so horrible because you were the perpetrator. There's a thing in the psychology underneath the visions model where we play a game where you get caught into the victim, perpetrator, rescuer. And if you ever get into one of those roles, you know that you're in an unending loop. And what you have to do is get out of that to have a different role altogether, which is what Diane Nash is talking about. Nevertheless, if we ever get into a situation where we have to accuse somebody else of being worse than we are, or of being a member of a race or a group that is worse than ours, or a sexual orientation group, or a gender group, or anything, anytime we do a one down or one up, or a pedestalization, or an inferiority or a superiority game, we're in the polarization trap or playing the victim. And this is not what Rohr is offering us as a life-giving story. So to prove that somebody else is a sinner or a bigger sinner than us gives us this strange belief that we're above all that sort of thing. Well, Diane Nash of the Nashville movement is the antithesis of Rohr's understanding of victimhood. She tells, I did all this research before I interviewed Jim Lawson, and there's an hour-and-a-half interview with her, and she says, in Jim Lawson's classes, we grew to a place where we were simply not able to be segregated anymore. We were not going to live a segregated existence. And there she is in the front of the march downtown to sit on the counters and integrate downtown Nashville. And it was about discovering a source of power inside her. Next slide. So she said, freedom by definition is people realizing that they are their own leaders. The interbeing story, or Rohr's pastoral or wisdom pattern, involves what Rohr says are all the things that great religion have deemed necessary, which is moral development, transformation, evolution, growing up, knowing when to let go, forgiving, and knowing when to surrender. And all of that we'll talk about in the prayer videos, and toward the end of this book that we're reading together of Richard Rohr's. You can't pull this off by thinking your way into it. You have to act your way into a new way of being. You can't think your way into a new way of acting. You have to act your way into a new way of thinking. And that is the contemplative way, because this will put you on your knees, metaphorically, or put yourself in your prayer chair, or put yourself out on a long daily walk. Or I have a friend who has a contemplative practice by swimming 3 miles every day. And she says she just zooms out. Some people do it through gardening. Some people do it all sorts of ways. It behooves you to find your way to get to this interbeing story and to discover the leadership that's within you. The next slide. So, last slide here is that the focus, it's the last slide for tonight. The focus is on taking one's own moral inventory rather than blaming, shaming, and attacking other people or yourself. It is that ability to go to the pool and swim, or go to your meditation chair and meditate, or go for your walk, or your long run, or your gardening, or your painting. April, I saw that you were with us. I bet this is part of your contemplative package. Anyway, there's a huge difference in thinking you have to accuse somebody else of being worse than we are, or of being a member of a race or a group that is worse than ours. And that makes us feel good, like we're good, moral, and superior, versus this event that the whole field of universal spirituality says no one else is your problem. You are always the locus of transformation or conversion. It is always about you, first of all, always. You can even use that as a good litmus test for authentic spirituality, Richard Rohr says. Somebody was reminding me that when we used to fly, they would tell us that if the oxygen masks drop down and you have a kid with you, put your own oxygen mask on first, and then you're able to serve other people. That's what that contemplation is about. I went into contemplation the other morning, and I went in as somebody who wanted to vanquish somebody else in an argument. And y'all, I got to the place of quiet rest where I wanted to hear that other person's story. Can you feel the difference between wanting to vanquish somebody and wanting to hear their story? That's the power of contemplation. So I think that's it for tonight.